Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
Hey everyone, this is Jillian, and I'm here with one of my very good friends and fellow Court Junkies, Brittnee. Hi, Brittnee.
Hi, Jillian. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. So I asked Brittnee to record this with me today and to help me recap the year 2020 with Court Junkie. 2020 was obviously quite a year, as I know it was for all of us. And I'm going to let Brittnee take the lead and let you know what we're up to with this episode.
Yes. And before I do that, I just want to acknowledge the fact that since we are doing a recap, that means that 2020 is almost over. And I think that deserves a sigh of relief, a woohoo. Yes. So excited to say goodbye to 2020 and move forward into 2021. So the purpose of today is we're going to go through the top 5 episodes of Court Junkie for the year 2020. Just briefly recap them, talk a little bit about why you chose to cover this case, talk about the verdict. Did they get it right? We'll talk about some of the comments from listeners on social media. And then at the end, we will cover some questions that your listeners had for you. Tons of questions. People want to know what you are up to in 2021 and a little bit more about you as a person and more about the podcast. So looking forward to covering all of those things today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brittnee. So as you said, you asked me for my top 10, which we're going to get into in just a second. But before we do that, I figured I would recap 2020 for Court Junkie just to kind of, be really transparent, tell you guys, about the year for the podcast and what it was like, to record episodes during this really unprecedented, bizarre year. So first of all, the number of downloads for the year, I hit about the 10 million mark, which is really good for the podcast. And I definitely saw a lot of growth this year, which was awesome, especially in spite of everything else going on. I released 50 regular episodes total. So I only took a few weeks off in there. And there were other exciting things that went on. The team of Court Junkie also grew. And if you're a regular listener, you probably noticed some new names at the end of the episodes. I do give credit to all of my writers. So, you may have heard Gabrielle Rousson, Matt Kaiser, Sarah Yonker, Kathleen McWilliams, Jordan Hemsley. I was able to add some new writers to the team, and I thought they did such a phenomenal job. And Gabrielle, Matt, and Sarah are definitely going to be signed on for next year. So I'm looking forward to that. And so in addition to the growth of the team of Court Junkie, there were also some COVID, difficulties that we dealt with. Obviously, everybody did in one way, shape, or form. I was lucky enough to have escaped actually getting COVID, as did you, Brittnee, and same with my family. But one of my writers did, in fact, get it. I think it was in July. And, she was pretty much out for the entire month and, was dealing with that. Just as an effect of the podcast, download numbers definitely were down for a while there. So even though I had a very good, year, it definitely was not as good as I feel like it probably would have been had download numbers not been so down. And I think the reason for that is a lot of people, I talked to a lot of other podcasters and they saw something similar with their own podcasts. And I think that's because people weren't commuting to work and, people lost their jobs. And again, Brittnee, I know you were one of those. So they were, with their families at home, not commuting. And, maybe they didn't have the time to listen to podcasts as they normally did. A few advertisers definitely pulled campaigns that they had planned in the future. And then just, on a personal note, the girl who takes care of my daughter during the day while I work, very early on in the pandemic, she got COVID and, so kind of trying to, she's okay and she's doing well, but, trying to work on the podcast during the day and deal with a 2-year-old is not exactly the easiest thing in the world. And Brittnee, I know you know all about that kind of thing.
I do. Well, it sounds like despite a pandemic and lots of things going on, Court Junkie was successful this year, and it was tough. I think people were not in the right mindset to sit down and listen to a podcast. Just so many things going on. And as you said, lack of commute and just going out in general, even walking anywhere for the longest time felt very unsafe. And so I don't think anybody will be surprised to hear that. But I also think it's great that you're offering so much transparency to your listeners. And I hope that 2021 brings an uptick in pretty much everything. So we have that to look forward to.
Yes, definitely.
So Jillian, one thing that you did not mention that I know that you were a part of was some TV appearances this year. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so that was actually a really fun and cool thing that happened this year that was absolutely beyond my wildest dreams. I did get to appear on the TV show 2020, and that was a really cool experience. I actually uploaded a YouTube video about that experience in particular. Now, due to COVID, I was not able to travel to New York and film in their studios with their hair and makeup people and, that whole kind of glamorous thing that you would imagine when doing a TV appearance. Instead, it was at a local studio here in Chicago. And it was very, there was one other camera person. I think there was 2 camera people and just myself in the room. So it was, very restricted, very safe, but that was exciting. My dad definitely cried when he saw it. So that was pretty cool. And then there were a couple other opportunities that came up. I did do another filming for a show that's supposed to come out on VH1 at some point. But again, because of COVID, everything's kind of delayed. So I have no idea any of the details about that at all, or when that'll be coming. And then there were two other TV shows that I was supposed to be involved with on the Discovery ID network. But those, again, were delayed, who knows, probably indefinitely. So I have no idea if those are going to happen or not.
I hope that they do come through in the next year. And I'm going to throw this at you because this question came up a lot from your listeners on Instagram about the future for Court Junkie and things that you hope to do in 2021. Some people were asking if TV, movies, TV shows, that kind of stuff was in your future. Would you like to be there at some point? Like, was it something that you enjoyed and you could see yourself doing moving forward?
So that is such an interesting question. And I never really know quite how to answer it because I am 38 years old. And I always say, I wish I was 10 years younger when I had first started this podcast because I wouldn't, have kids. I wouldn't, be so rooted at home as I am now. I would definitely be open to more TV appearances. I kind of feel like I'm kind of getting the hang of it a little bit more. They're a lot of fun. I like doing it. As far as like traveling or, really getting involved in something like that, I just don't see that happening right now in my life right now. I have a 2-year-old daughter and a husband, and we're kind of working on growing our family. So it's not really the right time, I think, for that. But having said that, I'm open to the possibilities, whatever possibilities do come my way. So I guess we will see.
Yeah. And I think one of the good things that has come out of 2020 and COVID is everyone and everything being able to happen online and everybody working from home, being able to do things from afar, ordering everything online, working from, your kids' bedroom like I am right now. So much more flexibility and people being able to do things from home. So hopefully that won't stop anything for you moving forward.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
So I know you asked me for my top 10 episodes, and we're not going to get into all of them, but I just wanted to let everybody know that number 10 for me was the Brooke Schuyler Richardson case. And that was a two-parter. I think it's kind of obvious why this one would be at number 10. It was an absolutely fascinating case, legally speaking. It was horribly sad. And it garnered a lot of engagement on my social channels and in my emails. And people had a lot of opinions about that. And I think anytime I can put out an episode that stirs up conversations like that, I absolutely love. So that was at number 10. Number 9 was The Arrogant Killer. And that was about the murder of Jennifer Fulford. Her killer, and the name, of course, escapes me now, but he took the stand at trial and was just absolutely, there's no other word for it, but arrogance and awful. And it was a very fascinating thing to see him on the witness stand, but he was found guilty, and I'm very glad he was. Number 8 was 88 Days, and that was the episode about Jamie Kloss. And the reason why I liked this one so much, so this was in partnership with Law and Crime, and Jennifer Tintner was the writer on this one. They had access to a lot of the behind the scenes footage from the investigation, so their body camera footage and things like that. So I had known about the case, I had followed it, but I didn't know all of the things about the investigation. So I thought it was an interesting angle that she took with that one. And I was really proud of that one. Number 7 would be the Laquan McDonald case. And I mean, this is for you too, Brittnee. Like, this one's close to us physically. This was in Chicago. I'll never forget when this happened. And it was just one that I knew when it went to trial, I would want to cover it. And this one is written by Sarah Yonker, who was one of my writers. And I think she did a really great job telling that story. It's very, very fascinating case. And then number 6 was Rebecca's Story. And that was episode 99. That was, Rebecca had reached out to me, and she had quite a story to tell about her family. Her father ended up murdering her grandparents. And she, was a teenager at the time, and she had to deal with her father being a convicted murderer and, attending his trial and things like that. And the fact that he had murdered her grandparents. So I thought that was just a very interesting episode as well.
Awesome. So let's dive in a little bit deeper and talk about the top 5 episodes for the year. And here we're just going to do a little bit more of an in-depth recap. And I'd love to hear from you why you picked these episodes. I think that there, unfortunately, is so much crime and so much injustice out there. It's probably overwhelming to find stories that you feel like you will be able to tell well and do it justice. So I want to hear from you why you picked this story. What sat with you when you told it? Do you feel like the jury got it right in that? And then share some comments that you got from your listeners. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into number 5, which was episode 110, The Hostage Taker. So in this episode, you cover Brian Flatoff, who in December of 2015 took hostages by gunpoint at a local motorcycle shop, Eagle Ridge Nation. When police arrived, there was some sort of confusion. Police ended up shooting one of the hostages and killing him, Michael Funk. And so eventually Flatoff was captured and then convicted of 14 felonies and sentenced to 100 years in prison. So what was it about this case that made you want to cover it?
So I think just the overall story of the case is what really grabbed my attention. The fact that he was eventually convicted of 14 felonies, like you said, and that included felony murder. And I just thought it was very interesting that here you have somebody who didn't actually pull the trigger himself, but was responsible for the entire situation. Nobody would have been there. None of the officers would have been there. None of the hostages would have been in danger had Brian Flatoff not done what he did. So he was responsible for it. I just thought that legally it was very interesting that this wasn't a run-of-the-mill, someone pulls the trigger and murders someone and then is convicted. It's a lot more complicated than that. So I was really interested in this one. And then made more interesting was the fact that he really wanted to represent himself during the trial. And he largely did. He did have the support of a public defender, but he represented himself. And I couldn't include everything in the episode, but it is a fascinating trial. When he would cross-examine witnesses, it would take so long for him to get his questions together and his thoughts together. And it would just kind of, for lack of a better term, go off the rails. I mean, he would go off on these tangents. And, the judge would admonish him, but the judge also wanted, to give him that right to represent himself. So, the judge was like kind of trying to tread lightly. But I mean, the trial would have lasted a lot longer had the judge not eventually kind of made him hurry it up. So that was really fascinating, I thought. His defense was that there was this police conspiracy and cover up. He said that the motorcycle shop had been raided, leading up to that event, and that the hostage takers had actually, who were members of this motorcycle shop, had actually sued the police department. And so his claim was that there was this, contentious history there. And so the police, when they responded, they already had these preconceived ideas in their head and that they were careless when shooting off their weapons and firing. So that was his defense, but it was really difficult to even understand what he was trying to say. Maybe had he had proper legal representation, he could have presented that better to the jury. I don't think that would have helped him. I do think that he should bear responsibility for what happened. But yeah, I just thought that was a really fascinating, legal case, and definitely not a run-of-the-mill one.
Absolutely. And that's what the general consensus in your comments from your listeners were, is that maybe had he had the proper representation, his sentence wouldn't be as severe as it was. A really great lawyer could have probably put together a nice defense for him. But at the end of the day, when you intend to cause chaos, which he did intend to do going there that day, then you do bear the responsibilities of what happens after that. And this is something Jillian and I, we talk a lot about separately, not about this case, but in general, is just the mental state of the people who do things like this. He was clearly suffering and maybe had some sort of break where, psychotic break, and just wasn't thinking clearly. He had been drinking the day before. So there's just so many things that a proper lawyer could have helped him with. Maybe his sentence wouldn't have been so harsh. But at the end of the day, I feel like they got it right in that he, needs to take ownership of a man is dead. And so very interesting case. You kind of, when you first hear it, you think, okay, well, this is, pretty basic, but going through all of the evidence that you covered, it was definitely a little bit trickier.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to number 4, which was no justice for Emmett Till. So I feel like most people know the name Emmett Till. For me, heard about Emmett Till in high school, but the real details of the case were very muted, obviously. And so this was a really tough one for me. And I know for a lot of your listeners, many had commented on Instagram that they appreciated that you covered the episode, but they themselves were not able to bring themselves to listen. So just for the sake of a recap, Emmett Till was murdered by 2 men in 1955, a horrific murder of which they were not charged, and really was kind of a catalyst. It was 100 days after the murder of Emmett Till that Rosa Parks did not get up from her seat on the bus, and really kind of sparked this movement. And so such an important starting point, but a lot of really hard details of the case that you covered here. So tell us why you wanted to go back in time and talk about Emmett Till.
So this is an absolutely uncomfortable case, to be sure, but it is incredibly important. It is such an important case in our history, and to know what the time was like back then. And also, to realize that there were these moments of heroism, which I'll get into in just a second. But I wanted to cover this case. One, I actually grew up in the town where Emmett Till was buried in Elsip, Illinois. And it's funny because one of my listeners contacted me and said she grew up in the neighborhood where he was buried too. So I guess, hi neighbor. But I was always intrigued by this case. I knew what had happened to him. I knew, the outcome of the case, but I didn't know the exact details of the trial. There were so many things that I didn't know. This was a case that Gabrielle Roussan, who was one of my new Court Junkie writers I mentioned earlier, who joined the team, she took on this case and she interviewed professors, legal scholars, and an author to get the exact details of the trial and to accurately paint a picture of that time. In the 1950s, when two white men are charged with the murder of a Black teenager. The details are horrific, like absolutely horrific. It's disgusting. It's horrible. But like I said, I think it's important. There are a couple instances of heroism in there, as I mentioned earlier. And one of them was Emmett Till's mom, who decided to show the photo of her deceased son to the world, to show the bruises that were on him and everything that had happened to him. And because of her bravery in doing that, it thrust this case into the national spotlight for just decades and decades to come, and really helped point out what happened to Emmett Till and how brutal and awful that it was. There was also a moment at the actual trial when Emmett Till's uncle, stands up and points to the two white men sitting at the defense table and says, they are the ones who kidnapped Emmett and who killed him. And the fact that a Black man during that time period had the courage to do that, to stand up in a courtroom, in front of an all-white jury, in front of all-white journalists. I mean, even, the Black journalists were segregated in another room. I don't even have the words for it, but I thought it was a really important case. I thought Gabrielle really did a great job with her research and with her interviews. And I wanted to cover it because I figured a lot of people would be like you and me, who would have heard about it, kind of knew the basics of it, but maybe didn't know exactly everything that happened at trial, including the, moments of heroism I just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an important case.
Yeah.
So number 3, let's move forward to number 3, which is this really happening? The wrongful conviction of Jeff Desovic. And you actually spoke to him, right?
Yes, I did. Actually, Jeff reached out to me.
Oh.
And he sent me an email and basically said, hey, I spent years in prison for a murder that I did not commit. I think it would be good for your show and I'd love to tell you about it. And that was an absolute no-brainer for me because, I looked into the case and it was just hard to believe how much he was railroaded when he was just 16 years old. The FBI had put together this description, like this profile. It was very generalized of the killer. He would be a loner. He would have issues with his mom, like that kind of thing. And that did describe Jeff. He said he was kind of an outcast at the time, but he was 16 years old. The scientific evidence at the scene literally excluded him. There was hair found on the body of this 15-year-old girl who was murdered, and he was being accused of it. There was hair found on her body and it did not belong to him. It was excluded. And at the trial, the prosecution was able to explain that away, saying that, that probably came from the medical examiner, even though they didn't test that to be sure. And Jeff's defense didn't test that either. They didn't really put up too much of a defense. Jeff wanted to testify on his own behalf. His defense attorney told him, no, that's probably not a good idea. And, Jeff being 16 years old at the time was like, okay. This case was just a perfect storm of everything that could go wrong when the system is against you that leads to a wrongful conviction. A lot of people may not think that wrongful convictions are very common or that they're easy to come by, but honestly, I think they're a lot more common than you might think. And just looking at everything that happened in this case, I thought was absolutely fascinating. Another point that I thought was really interesting was that while he was in prison, and he was telling me about what prison was like for him. And he was saying that he, kept to himself, but he did make one friend. And he befriended this other man and well, I wouldn't even say man at the time, almost like another kid, young man. And that young man also said that he was innocent of a murder that he was accused of and had been convicted of. So they would get together and they would talk about their cases. And as it would turn out, Jeff gets exonerated. And shortly after that, his friend from prison also was completely exonerated and deemed actually innocent. And the sad thing is that he was only out a couple of years and then he ended up passing away. So yeah, very fascinating case. I wouldn't say it's like a typical wrongful conviction case by any means, but I just thought Jeff, was very eloquent in explaining his ordeal and how that exactly happened.
Yeah. And what's really incredible about him is that he is not bitter and he's used this experience to help other people. He speaks to police officers and detectives to try to teach them about how to avoid false confessions and the dangers of honing in on a suspect. I mean, when you have the pressure of a community to find the murderer of a 15-year-old girl, that has to be a lot. And you want the person that fits this very general. I mean, it's not funny, but I was laughing listening to this description because it was anybody on the street.
Right.
And you want so badly to find that person. And I understand that aspect of it for the family and for the community. But I think I agree with you. I think this happens so often. And it's the luck of the falsely accused to find people outside of prison that are going to support them, because Jeff had reached out to the Innocence Project right before and didn't hear anything back. And it wasn't until a new DA was appointed that then he was able to, get some attention to him. And so it was about everything falling into place for him that he was released. How many other people does this happen to? And they just don't have such luck. It's really kind of overwhelming and scary, but amazing for him that he's turned it around. He's, created this positive life and is trying to help other people when I think it would be natural and okay to be very bitter about what happened to him. So that was just a really incredible story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yes. Okay. So let's move on to case number 2. This was another really difficult one, very hard, I think probably for a lot of people, a lot of parents especially. So that was the case of Jamarian Lawhorn. And Jamarian was 12 years old when he murdered a 9-year-old, stabbed him in a park, seemingly with no reason other than he wanted to die. So he actually called 911. He confessed on the spot and said, "Send the police here, have them kill me. I don't want to live anymore." Very difficult to hear. Of course, he was convicted of this crime. And then it really comes out in the case that he was a victim himself of child abuse. The system really failed him. His mother and his stepfather failed him. And so it's the question of what role does that play in a child? He was a child, a 12-year-old, their growth and their mental state. And there's a really incredible twist to the end of this, which I'm sure was the reason in part that you picked this story with the victim's grandmother. So I'll let you kind of go into that a little bit more.
So this one, first of all, confession, I cried multiple times when researching and writing this one. This was just absolutely horrific and horrible. I mean, nothing is more tragic. You have a 12-year-old boy killing a 9-year-old. And then, wanting to die himself. And then you find out he's abused. And, everything you just said is absolutely horrific. I decided for this story, I was very fascinated. Jamarian has been convicted. And every 6 months, there are hearings, to discuss his progress in court. And, I was reading articles about, and all the reports about his progress and seeing that, watching the progression of it. So at first, right after he goes in, he lashes out a lot. He just seems to have a lot of issues, a lot of anger in him. And, as time goes on, that anger turns towards this incredible amount of remorse and shame and despair. thinking about what he did. And he would, and this is according to the counselors and people and therapists who are working with him during his rehabilitation. And, they would say that he is now, so remorseful, and he himself doesn't feel like he should live because he took another life. So then he gets to be suicidal, and he's going through all of these things. And as time goes on, eventually you notice, a change, and you notice that he's striving to do better. And he gets the support of his victim's own grandmother, who starts attending these hearings for him and who starts being there for him. And I decided to, just kind of on a whim, I didn't think she would talk to me, but I decided to reach out to the prosecutor in the case. And I wanted to know what her views were in prosecuting a 12-year-old boy for murder. Like I said, he was convicted, but he is undergoing this intense therapy and rehabilitation. And that is their number one goal in the prosecutor's office, is to get him to a point where he can be released and he is no longer a danger to society. So I thought it was fascinating. And I was really surprised that the prosecutor was so willing to talk to me and to talk about it and to talk about the program itself. And I just thought it was really, really interesting. Her views on it. She seems to be very realistic. She knows that if he is not rehabilitated, and if he does, get out of the system early, which he's supposed to get out by the time he's 21 years old or when he turns 21. But she even made a comment to me, something along the lines of, why am I even doing this if it's not to rehabilitate him?
Yeah. Someone
like him, And so, I just thought that was such a powerful episode. I cried so many times. And, I know in talking about it, and I'll let you talk about this too, I know you were really touched about the victim's grandmother attending the hearing and showing support for Jamarian as well.
Yeah, I really struggled with the aftermath of his relationship with his mother. She really did not come often to visit him. And
Jamarian's mom, right?
Jamarian's mom did not come to visit him often. They would notice behavioral issues with him when she would miss a visit or hadn't visited in a while. And that was really difficult for me as a mother to hear that she wasn't there and helping him, especially because in her own separate trial for child abuse, she was seemed to be very remorseful. And what could I have done differently? I feel like I could have made his life different had I done different things. But then, in the aftermath of it, she didn't show up. She really didn't come there and support him, even though she was remorseful before. So you have to wonder, was that all just a little bit of a show for her own trial? And so Jamarian had made a comment at some point, and he said, this was the love that I needed, in reference to his victim's grandmother. And that I too just had to kind of stop. It really took my breath away, because it made me feel just so sad for him. And he was so desperate for a positive parent figure. One of the things that the prosecutor that you had spoke to said was that they deal with hundreds of cases every year of neglect and of child abuse. And those kids, most of the time, do not go on to murder another child, another human, harm them. And so it's not really an excuse. And I understand why she said that, to her point, but that's also assuming that all children have the capacity to deal with that kind of emotional and physical abuse that he was put through for so many years. And so it's kind of that nature versus nurture, which is a whole nother episode, I'm sure. But there were just a lot of twists in that case, and nobody won. It was really sad.
So hold on. Yeah. Can you guys tell right now that Brittnee is a total court junkie? I mean, the funny thing about this is that, you and I became friends before even really discussing true crime and things like that. And it just kind of became that we discovered that we both had this passion and this love for it. And it's just funny because sometimes I think you are even more passionate than I am.
I don't know about that, but this is just being here with you today and discussing this is honestly a little bit of a dream come true. I don't want to be dramatic, but I really did grow up in a true crime world. I watched cold case files and unsolved mysteries, not cartoons. So, it's kind of just been this thing, this part of my life that I've really enjoyed hearing about, learning about, trying to understand. My thing that I tell people is the reason I'm so obsessed with true crime is because I just don't understand how some of these things happen. So hearing about it, learning about it is so fascinating for me, understanding how the humans operate and that things are not always what they appear to be. And so that's where I find this joy from it. So meeting you and then our friendship just kind of naturally evolved. And so we met over a year ago. So the fact that now that we're sitting here today doing this is just, I think, really cool. Thank you for letting me be a part of that.
Of course.
Yes. Okay. So we have one more episode to talk about your number one episode of 2020, Henry Segura. So this was an interesting one. This was also a 2-part episode. November of 2010, horrific murder in Tallahassee, Florida, involving a single mother, her son, and her twin daughters. They were brutally murdered. And the prosecution contended that one of the children's, the son, his father, was the killer, Henry. At his defense, though, Henry blames the Mexican cartel, which I feel like when you're first reading that description, you're like, okay, this is a little bit outlandish. But as you unravel the case, the words reasonable doubt come up a lot. And that's what your listeners mentioned a lot on Instagram. Where was the reasonable doubt? Where was the reasonable doubt? I think that's probably, and I don't want to speak for you, one of the reasons that you chose this case.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, this one, I am just dying for people to talk to you about this case. I don't want to say I love it, but I guess I'll never forget choosing to watch this trial and sit through the prosecution's opening statements. I believe it was like 34 minutes long. Okay. And, seemed pretty matter of fact. Like, okay, they've got, like his DNA. It seems like it is probably him, okay, all right. Yeah. Sounds like he did it. And in my head, I was like, okay, is this going to be an open and shut case? Maybe I'm not going to cover it. So then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to watch the defense's opening statement and just kind of see if there is an interesting legal angle here. Because if it, kind of is cut and dry, I might not want to cover it. So then I watched the defense's opening statement and it is well over an hour. And I have never been so on the edge of my seat. I couldn't believe it. They literally took every single thing that the prosecution said, basically said that they have an explanation for it. And whether they fully did and whether, they delivered all that they promised in that opening statement is another topic. But they really had some reasonable doubt here. Mm-hmm. I mean, and like you said, when you first think about it, like, okay, yeah, he's blaming the Mexican cartel. But they literally have a man who is part of that cartel testifying for the defense, saying that, yes, he ordered the hit on Brandy, on the mother. And then her friend produces letters that she had gotten from this man while he was in prison. One of them being, what was it, like the day before she was killed? I mean, it's eerie. It's just mind blowing. So you think in your head, like, okay, the Mexican cartel, like I highly doubt she has any connection to it. Now, whether it was a wild coincidence or not, the amount of reasonable doubt in this case was just astronomical. In my opinion, he ended up being convicted, as you know, and I was surprised because this is one where I don't know how. I mean, I remember talking to my mom about this case. If I were on the jury, I can unequivocally say I would have had to hold out. Like, there's no way I could have voted guilty for it. I mean, how did you feel about this?
Yeah, I think the thing that didn't make sense for me is the fact that he would murder 3 children and his ex-girlfriend over $20,000 in child support. Mm-hmm. He was a self-proclaimed philanderer. He was not a good husband, good boyfriend. He had several children with other people and he owed them all money. So why Brandy? That did not make, there needs to be a motive there. And with this, there was not a motive. And before the murder, he had kind of made peace with her, right? And she had sent him a text that was a little bit flirtatious and kind of showed that she was no longer ticked off at him. And that happened, leading up to the murder. So why go there, calm her down, get on her good side, see his child and play with the twins, and then just turn around and murder them all? That just didn't make sense for me. And so this was definitely a head scratcher. I don't believe that they got it right on this one.
I agree, though. I think that, it was just in the shovel. There was a shovel found in her house, in her bedroom. And then the defense team had a gang expert or a cartel expert testify that is something that cartels will do. They'll leave like
their calling card. Yeah.
Yeah. Specifically a spade. There's just so many things that now, whether or not he really did it, I have no idea. But I just felt like if I was a juror and that was a damn good defense, right? That was in my mind, one of the best defenses I've seen.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. So. Really, really fascinating case. I can see why you would pick that one. And maybe it's not over for that one. Maybe there's something happening behind the scenes that we don't know about there.
Yeah. And I'm totally following that one, but it's just so funny because it's not my most downloaded episode. It's not one that, got a ridiculous amount of engagement. It's just one that I am like, oh my gosh, I really want to talk to someone about this, So it is my number one, probably not yours at home listener, but it definitely was one of mine.
Well, I think that that's a really good segue into our next little section here of answering some questions that your listeners had submitted via Instagram. And I want to kind of continue on with this subject of why you're picking cases, because that was a really common question. What do you look for when picking a case? What does it have to involve? Is there anything that you avoid covering? What meets the criteria to be featured on Court Junkie?
So my ideal case is one that has something legally fascinating about it. I've always said, like with my podcast, I like to draw attention to various cases that can either demonstrate that reform is needed in some way, shape, or form, or, just that have an interesting educational aspect to them. So cases that I know are kind of controversial or that I know will get people talking are cases that I like to cover. I don't like to cover cases involving children. I have, absolutely. We just talked about in my number one involved, children who were victims. But it's just something that I can't cover too often. And that has definitely changed since becoming a mom. That's not to say that I didn't have that amount of compassion or empathy prior, but it just kind of hits me a little bit different now. So I kind of stay away from those. If it's a straightforward case that I don't think is really gonna, do much of anything, I try to stay away from that. So it really just kind of depends. But overall, and I've said this a billion times in other interviews and in places, I am a giant dork. You're a bigger one. But so it's kind of just what I find interesting, what I would want to hear about, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a good question that you got from Mads Ann. Do you think people are born evil or bad?
I have no idea. I am
that's a big one.
Qualified to answer this question in any way, shape, or form. I do not have the proper education for it. So I don't know. Having said that, I kind of feel like you have to be. When you have like serial killers who lead completely normal lives, you hear that they had a completely normal upbringing, no trauma, nothing went wrong environmentally with them, at least that you know about. So it kind of thinks like they had to have been born that way, right? But I cannot answer that question. What about you? Why don't you take a stab at it?
No, I'm asking you because I also cannot answer that question. I think that I have a very similar sentiment as you. Serial killers are the most terrifying and the most interesting to me because for the most part, they are very normal people, have normal lives. So in that respect, I think there has to be some sort of thing that you are born with. I also think there's a difference between like crimes of passion, right? And you and I have talked about this of what, God forbid, anything ever happened to our children, what would you do as a parent? I think that's a very sensitive and hard thing. I see you taking a deep breath because that's tough and like putting yourself in that position. So listen, this is one of the most fascinating things about crime is just trying to understand where does it come from, what pushes people to do what they do.
And how you can prevent it. I mean,
right.
If we had insight into that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's tackle that. Okay, so a less difficult question then. After the pandemic is over, what are you most looking forward to doing?
Oh, God, so many things, like everybody. I can't wait to eat inside of a restaurant. I can't wait to see family members I haven't seen all year. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of that. I can't wait for my daughter to be able to play with friends again and to be able to go to the children's museum. I want to take her to Disney World. I want to, there's so much. I mean, everything.
Yeah, everything.
Everything.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, I want to do things that I don't ever want to do, like go to the dentist or get my car washed or, like ridiculous things that nobody wants to do. I'm dying for it. Soon. It'll happen soon.
You'll be able to go to the dentist soon.
Okay, just to be clear, I have been to the dentist since the pandemic. I want to go to the dentist without having to wear a mask and it being just more painful than it already is to go to the dentist.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so let's tackle a few more questions because like I said, you got a lot of them. I think you already alluded to, did we already talk about what you have planned for 2021?
No.
Okay. So
we have not.
What's going on in 2021? What do you have planned for Court Junkie, professionally, personally? Tell us all.
Yeah. So I'm actually excited about this one because, I just feel like I've been working so long on so many other aspects of Court Junkie and ways to expand it and grow it and including content. So there's a lot of stuff. One thing that has always kind of not bothered me, but something that I don't think I'm doing very well. And that is really shining a light on what exactly either needs to be reformed in our criminal justice system or what the major issues are. And again, I don't want to put my own opinion into things. So I would rather talk to people who are more versed in these types of things, get their opinions, what they're striving towards and that kind of thing. So once a month in 2021, and I'm not sure when exactly I'm going to be starting this, but I'm going to put out an additional episode on Court Junkie's main feed that is going to focus on a singular issue in our justice system. So I used to do something called Court Junkie briefs, and I stopped doing them because they weren't up to like my standards, to be honest. Like I was working so hard at regular episodes. And then I would be like, okay, like this is, this episode I should do an episode on false confessions because that's a fascinating aspect of it. But then I would just do, maybe one interview and then put that out as an episode. And it just wasn't, I could do so much more. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to focus on the cash bail system, overcrowding in prisons, things like that. And once a month, I'm going to put out an episode that's going to highlight different cases that are affected by these things. I'm going to interview experts, hopefully on both sides of the aisle. I've already gotten started on a few topics and I'm super excited about them. So I think it's just going to be something that for me, I'm going to feel good about putting out there. So I'm excited about that. More content on my Patreon, and that involves you actually too.
Yes.
So if you guys like myself and Brittnee together, we're going to be doing once a month a Court Junkie after show on Patreon where we're going to discuss the Court Junkie cases for the month. So that should be up. Hopefully February will be our first one. I'm thinking we can recap January's cases.
Yeah, I think that'll be really exciting because you had just mentioned this. I just want to reiterate that one of the great things about Court Junkie is that you really just focus on the facts. what's presented at trial. You don't put your own opinion in there. And I think that your listeners really appreciate that about you. There's not a lot of fluff in your episodes. And it's very fair and to the point. But at the same time, this will give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about how the cases affected you and things that kind of fell on the cutting room floor that may be also really important and that listeners would like to hear and appreciate. And then give an opportunity for listeners to also get more involved in the show. And so you'll be doing more asking for people's feedback and leaving comments and a little bit more engagement on social media. And so this additional episode will be a place for you to connect more with your listeners. And I'm excited to be a part of that. So thank you for letting me join you there.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you join. It's going to be great to honestly be a little bit more laid back and unscripted and more myself. And, when there's like a case like a Henry Segura that I'm like dying to talk about, this will be a good outlet for me to talk about it with you on the pod. So yeah, so that, and then, just additional content that I'm working on as well for 2021. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I feel like that's a good place for us to stop with the questions.
Okay. Thank you so much for helping me do this. I feel like it's so much better to have you and me talk about stuff rather than me just ramble on and on and on. My listeners are so sick of that, I'm sure.
I really doubt that they are, but I really appreciate it. I look forward to doing more of these. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Brittnee.
Okay.
All right. Have a good one, guys. Happy 2021.
Yes. Happy New Year. Happy, healthy New Year.